look at Mike Ehrmantraut and we see a statue of stability, a man with a code of honor in a world of chaos. But that story we tell ourselves? It is a complete lie. If you actually analyze his timeline, you realize Mike isn't a, quote, noble criminal. He is a walking contradiction who breaks every single rule he tries to teach. Today, we are deconstructing the myth of the, quote, good hitman and exposing the ugly truth. Mike Ehrmantraut was never the hero, he was the villain of his own story. To understand why Mike fails so consistently, you have to look at the psychology behind his rules. He didn't create this code of honor because he is a moral man. He created it as a defense mechanism. It is a psychological shield designed to keep him from looking in the mirror and seeing a monster. And the cracks in that shield started long before he ever met Gus Fring. The first and most fundamental rule Mike broke wasn't a criminal one. It was the oath he swore to society. We often forget that before he was a hitman, he was a veteran and a police officer for decades. But he wasn't just a cop. He was a willing participant in a corroded system. His philosophy back then was simple conformity. You go along to get along. You take the money, you look the other way, and you survive. But the tragedy that broke Mike wasn't the corruption itself. It was how he infected his own son with it. Matty Ehrmantraut was everything Mike wasn't. He was an idealist. He was clean. He believed in the badge. When Matty found out his partners were dirty, he hesitated. He wanted to do the right thing. And this is where Mike made the most fatal decision of his life. Instead of supporting his son's integrity, instead of helping him fight the system or finding a legal way out, Mike decided to break him. He sat his own son down and dismantled his worldview piece by piece. He told him that morality was a liability. He told him that to stay safe, he had to debase himself and take the bribe. It is a moment of absolute psychological horror. Mike used his authority as a father to convince his son to betray his own conscience. He thought he was saving him. He told himself that compromising your morals is better than ending up dead. But this is where the universe of the show delivers its harshest lesson. A compromise with evil does not guarantee safety. Even after Matty took the money, even after he broke his own spirit to please his father and fit in, his partners killed him anyway. They saw his hesitation. They saw the good man underneath the act, and they viewed him as a liability. Matty died because he listened to Mike. That is the weight that drags behind Mike in every scene we watch. He violated the most primal rule of parenthood, which is to protect your child's life and their soul. He failed at both, and his reaction to that failure was to double down on the darkness. He took his revenge, eliminated the 2 officers responsible, and fled to Albuquerque. But he didn't leave his trauma behind. Instead, he calcified it. This is the birth of the Mike persona we know. He convinced himself that the reason Matty died wasn't because of the corruption, but because they weren't professional enough about it. So he invented a new set of rules. He decided that if he could just be the perfect criminal, punctual, reliable, emotionless, he could impose order on chaos. He could keep his new family safe. It was a lie he told himself to keep from going insane. He created a binary world where there are, quote, good criminals and, quote, bad cops, honorable thieves and, quote, dirty priests. He tries to sell this philosophy to people like Price, the bumbling pill seller, telling him that being a criminal is just a job like any other. But deep down, Mike knows it is nonsense. He uses this projected confidence to hold the viewer's attention and command respect. When we see him disarm a loudmouth like Subcheck while calmly eating a sandwich, we get a dopamine hit. We admire his competence. We fall for the expectation versus reality trap the writers set for us. We expect a criminal to be erratic. Mike is calm, so we trust him. We forget that his competence is in service of a machine that grinds up innocent people. The show uses our admiration for his skills to blind us to his moral failures. And make no mistake, the failures start piling up immediately. For a man who claims to be the wisest player in the game, his judgment of character is frequently disastrous. He convinces himself that he can control outcomes by strictly adhering to the terms of a deal. "I promise to do a job," he says. "I hold up my end." It sounds noble. It sounds like a samurai code, but in the context of a drug cartel, holding up your end of the deal often means becoming an accessory to atrocities that violate every human standard of decency. He tells himself that he can keep his hands clean by only hurting those who are in the game. This is his mental firewall. If you are a civilian, you are off limits. If you are in the game, you accept the risks. It is a neat, tidy way to organize the world. But as we continue this deep dive, you are going to see how that wall crumbles, brick by brick. You will see how the separation between the game and the innocent is an illusion Mike uses to sleep at night, and how his refusal to see reality leads to the very thing he swore to prevent. We are just scratching the surface of his hypocrisy. Because the moment he started working for Gus Fring, he didn't just break the law. He signed a contract that would force him to betray the only thing he had left, his word. And nothing demonstrates this catastrophic failure of character more than the tragedy of Nacho Varga. But to understand how Mike doomed a young man who was just looking for a way out, exactly like his son was, we have to look at how Mike fools himself into thinking he's in control. If Mike Ehrmantraut had a single redeeming quality that the audience clung to, it was his protectiveness. We wanted to believe that if you were an innocent civilian or a kid who got in over his head, Mike would be your shield. But that belief is shattered when we examine the tragedy of Nacho Varga. Nacho was not just another soldier in the cartel wars. To Mike, he was a mirror image of his own son, Matty. A young man trapped in a corrupt system, desperate to get out, and willing to risk everything to protect his honest, hard-working father, Manuel. Mike recognized this dynamic immediately. He saw the fear in Nacho's eyes. He gave his word, implied but ironclad, that he would help navigate this minefield. He promised that the civilian father would remain untouched. This fits perfectly into the good criminal narrative Mike sells himself. He believes he can compartmentalize the violence. But when the corporate machinery of Gustavo Fring demanded a sacrifice, Mike's code evaporated. When Fring needed a pawn to manipulate the Salamancas, he didn't care about Mike's promises. He demanded absolute obedience. And here is where the heartbreak sets in. Mike didn't stand his ground. He didn't find a third option. Instead, he broke into Nacho's home. He planted the fake bank records in the safe. He personally laid the breadcrumbs that would frame Nacho and force him into a corner from which there was no escape. Mike essentially signed the death warrant for the young man he was supposed to be mentoring. He saved the father, yes, but he fed the son to the wolves to keep his own position secure. The devastation of this betrayal culminates in a quiet confrontation with Manuel Varga by a chain-link fence. Mike tries to offer some twisted form of comfort, speaking about justice coming for the Salamancas. He tries to wrap the ugly reality in the shiny paper of his moral code, but Manuel refuses to buy it. He looks at Mike and delivers the most cutting assessment of his entire character, stripping away the mask of the professional fixer and revealing the thug underneath. He tells him that this isn't justice, it is merely revenge. He lumps Mike in with the rest of the gangsters, refusing to see the distinction Mike desperately clings to. In that moment, the audience is forced to realize that Mike's rules only apply when they are convenient. If the betrayal of Nacho Varga was a reluctant compromise, the fate of Werner Ziegler was the final nail in the coffin of Mike's soul. Werner was the ultimate test of the civilian rule. He was a German engineer, a soft, sentimental man who built things. He wasn't a player. He wasn't violent. He was just a lonely man who made a foolish, human mistake because he missed his wife. He escaped the compound not to rat to the authorities, but to spend a weekend at a spa. Mike liked Werner. He drank beer with him. He shared stories with him. He saw him as a friend. But when Fring decided that Werner's incompetence was a liability, Mike was faced with the ultimate choice. Save the innocent man and burn his own life down, or follow orders like a good soldier. We watch the sequence hoping for a miracle, hoping that the clever Mike Ehrmantraut will pull a rabbit out of the hat. But there is no rabbit. There is only the cold desert night and a silenced pistol. Mike convinces himself he has no choice. This is the great lie of the conformist. There is always a choice. Mike could have let Werner go. He could have fought back. But he chose his paycheck and his safety over the life of a friend. When he raises that weapon and executes a terrified man who is looking up at the stars, Mike becomes indistinguishable from the dirty cops in Philadelphia who killed his son. He killed Werner for the exact same reason Maddie was killed, to protect the secrets of a criminal enterprise. In that instant, Mike Ehrmantraut didn't just break his rules. He became the very thing he spent his entire life hating. If there is one moment that defines Mike Ehrmantraut in the cultural zeitgeist, one speech that gets shared on social media and quoted by fans as the ultimate wisdom of the underworld, it is the half measures monologue. You know the one. He sits in that dark living room recounting a story from his days on the beat in Philadelphia. He talks about a domestic abuser who he should have removed from the equation permanently. Instead, he chose a half measure. He threatened the man. He tried to scare him straight, and he let him go. 2 weeks later, the abuser killed his wife. The lesson Mike delivers to Walter White is absolute and chilling. Never make that mistake again. When you identify a threat, you extinguish it. You do not negotiate, you do not hesitate, and you certainly do not hope for the best. This is the philosophy that supposedly guides Mike's every move. It is the reason we respect him. We see him as the one man who is willing to do what is necessary to prevent chaos. But here is the devastating irony that most people miss. The man who coined the phrase, "no half measures," is actually the single biggest offender of that very rule. If you look at the collapse of the Fring Empire and Mike's own tragic end, every single catastrophe can be traced back to a moment where Mike Ehrmantraut took a half measure. Let's look at the evidence. Take Lydia Rodart Quayle. From the moment we meet her, she is a walking, talking liability. She is paranoid, she is impulsive, and she is reckless. She tries to have Mike and his men eliminated multiple times. By Mike's own logic, by the very code he preached in that living room, Lydia should have been removed immediately. She was a threat to the operation and a threat to his life. We even see the scene where Mike breaks into her home, weapon ready, prepared to do exactly that. But he doesn't do it. Why? Because she offers him something. She offers him an ocean of methylamine. In that critical second, Mike trades his survival instinct for a business opportunity. He convinces himself that he can control her, that her utility outweighs her danger. That is the definition of a half measure. And what is the result? Lydia becomes the bridge to the white supremacists. She is the one who brings Todd and Uncle Jack into the fold. If Mike had followed his own advice and eliminated the threat when he had the chance, the entire third act of the saga would have been different. His greed and his arrogance blinded him to the reality that some people are just too dangerous to keep around, no matter what they can offer you. Then there is the matter of his guys. Mike prides himself on the stability of his network. He assures everyone that his men are solid, that they will keep their mouths shut as long as they are paid. But to handle these payments, the lifeblood of his security, he hires a lawyer named Dan Wachsberger. This man is a caricature of incompetence. He is flashy, he is sloppy, and he is weak. Mike, the supposed genius of vetting and security, entrusts his freedom and his granddaughter's future to a man who crumbles the second the authorities put a little pressure on him. Choosing a cut-rate lawyer for a high-stakes operation was a half measure. It was operational laziness. Mike assumed it would be fine because it had been fine so far. This is the normalization of deviance, a concept where you get away with a risk for so long that you stop seeing it as a risk. When Wachsberger flips, he gives the DEA everything. He destroys the legacy fund. He forces Mike to go on the run. Mike's refusal to secure a truly bulletproof system for his people wasn't just an oversight. It was a violation of his core promise to protect his family. But the most egregious, unforgivable half measure of all is his relationship with Walter White. Mike identified Walt as a disaster waiting to happen almost immediately. You called him a ticking time bomb. He knew Walt was ego-driven, volatile, and dangerous. Yet, time and time again, when Mike had the gun in his hand, when he had the authority and the opportunity to end the threat, he lowered his weapon. Remember the laundry. Remember the desert. Mike let Walt make the phone call that saved his life and doomed Gail Bedecker. Mike agreed to partner with Walt in the new meth operation even after Gus was gone. Why? Because he thought he was smarter. He thought he could handle Walt. He thought he could keep the chemistry teacher in a box. It was pure hubris. Mike believed his own hype. He thought his glare and his grunts were enough to keep a monster in check. Every time he let Walt live, every time he agreed to work with him instead of walking away or taking him out, he was choosing a half measure. He was bargaining with cancer. And just like the abuser in his story from Philadelphia, the threat he failed to eliminate eventually came back to destroy everything he cared about. Mike preached absolute ruthlessness to everyone else, but when it came to his own decisions, he was paralyzed by profit, by ego, and by a false sense of superiority. He didn't die because he was outsmarted. He died because he refused to follow the one rule he claimed to value above all others. Fans of the series often rush to Mike Ehrmantraut's defense. They argue that unlike the sadism of Gustavo Fring or the manipulative ego of Walter White, Mike takes no pleasure in the violence. They say he views it as a necessary evil, a tool to be used only when absolutely required. This defense is comfortable. It allows us to root for him. But this entire line of reasoning crashes and burns the moment we arrive at the aftermath of the train heist. This is the moment where the moral compass doesn't just spin, it shatters completely. The operation was a masterpiece of engineering and timing. They siphoned an ocean of methylamine without anyone knowing. It was the perfect crime. Until a young boy on a dirt bike, Drew Sharp, rolled up to witness their triumph. In a split second that changes the DNA of the show, Todd Alquist raises his weapon and ends the boy's life. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't think. He simply erases the witness. It is a monstrous act, and it serves as the ultimate litmus test for the souls of the three men standing there. Jesse Pinkman is destroyed by it. The loss of an innocent life breaks him. It violates the one line he refused to cross. He screams, he cries, he demands to leave the business immediately. Walter White, true to his descent into darkness, rationalizes it almost instantly, whistling a carefree tune shortly after they dispose of the evidence. But Mike? Mike's reaction is perhaps the most disturbing of all because it is so hollow. Here is a man whose entire motivation is supposedly the love of his granddaughter. Here is a man who still grieves for his own son. Here is a man who established a rule specifically to protect civilians. And yet, when it comes time to decide what to do with the person who pulled the trigger, Mike votes to keep him on the payroll. He looks at the situation through a lens of icy, detached pragmatism. He argues that Todd is a useful asset. He reasons that Todd followed orders to ensure no witnesses remained. He calculates that firing or punishing Todd could invite retaliation from his uncle's gang, a risk Mike is not willing to take. To Mike, the death of a child in the desert wasn't a tragedy that demanded justice. It was an operational overhead. It was a logistical problem to be solved with chemical barrels and silence. In that decision, the illusion of the honorable criminal dissolves. The man who executed Werner Ziegler with a heavy heart now accepts the elimination of a child as the cost of doing business. By agreeing to integrate Todd into their operation, Mike becomes a full accomplice to the act. He demonstrates that his code is not a set of iron principles, but a sliding scale that adjusts based on profit and convenience. He proves that his protection of the innocent is conditional. It only applies when it doesn't threaten his bottom line. When he chose to keep the methylamine flowing over seeking justice for Drew Sharp, Mike Ehrmantraut didn't just break a rule. He sold the last remnant of his humanity. To make the audience root for a complicated anti-hero, the writers usually give him a noble, altruistic motivation. For Walter White, it was the desperate need to provide for his family before a terminal illness took him. For Mike Ehrmantraut, the primary directive of his entire existence was securing a financial future for his widowed daughter-in-law, Stacy, and his beloved granddaughter, Kaylee. Mike manically repeats this mantra to himself and everyone around him. He convinces himself that he is stepping into the darkness, doing terrible deeds, and risking his soul solely so these two women will never want for anything. He constructs elaborate offshore schemes, utilizes shell companies, and risks his freedom to funnel millions of illicit dollars into their accounts. But we have to look at the cold, hard balance sheet of this obsession. What was the actual result of all that suffering and compromise? Absolutely nothing. Every single cent that Mike earned through the destruction of others was seized by the federal government. And this collapse happened not once, but twice. The first time, the DEA froze the accounts and safety deposit boxes after the fall of the Fring Empire. At that specific moment, any rational man who actually cared about being present for his family would have cut his losses. He would have realized the criminal system was broken, retired to a quiet life, and focused on being a grandfather. Instead, driven by an irrational need to fix the mistake and proving that he could beat the house, Mike dove back into the fray. He reluctantly joined forces with the unstable Walter White to build a new operation, exposing himself